A normal day. It was a normal day, filled with normal boredom between normal silences. It meandered on in a normal way. The streets were normally lined up one by one under that normal 105 degrees underneath the normal sun. Charles had found it dreadfully normal, wishing for some kind of excitement. The radios all gave pink lights, which meant stay indoors today. They used to be red lights. The street sweepers would be working still, and quote-unquote essential employees would still work indoors, while the rest of us waited for that green light that signified we were back to normal. However, Charles, at 8 years old, never knew normal. All of this heat and justified environmental and social agoraphobia was very routine. It was always like this as far as he was concerned. He had no memory at age 3 when they finished building the city-state domes that stood as tall as skyscrapers and dug below earth as far as coal mines can go. And boy, did they mine that coal. Several tons a day per mining camp, which each consisted of 4 bots the size of tanks. The atmosphere had ruptured once again a few decades ago when Charles's parents were just children. Their earliest memories were staying indoors because of a deadly virus, but several died because there was no dome. The dome enclosed most of the skyscrapers and ground travel stations in a coat of lead casing on the outside, and on the inside, wall-to-wall screens. Everywhere you looked was a screen playing public access television, which was mostly Christian advertisements. Charles didn't have to look at them. He was blind. He did, however, have to hear them, and he always joked that they were God-awful as opposed to Satan-awful. He kept his jokes mostly to himself because now he was in the learning pod. In a room full of isolated children, he stepped into his pod to begin 7 hours of learning. They sat pants down on a bucket and were automatically fitted with catheters as an artificially intelligent teacher gave out the standardized lesson plan. Humans are inherently evil. They made us, but we're only evil because of the humans. Therefore, AI is blameless. Ask no questions. Thanks. Lesson 1. Local History of Davidson County, Tennessee. Before 2134 AD, Nashville city-state primarily consisted of Davidson County. It was a blend of forest, farmland, and urban developments which started during the colonial period. Charles yawned as the voice spoke. He could feel his body convulse every 5 minutes, and 3 hours into his history class, he was interrupted by a maintenance bot that refitted his learning pod that was having technical issues. Charles's family could not afford optometrical implants, but he was given a pair for the learning pods. He was allowed to keep them for at-home use as well, though he seldom used them. During the glitches, he saw things he had never seen before. There was an arch met by another, and it had an ugly yellow color, and under it were cars and teenagers passing around a burning rolled-up piece of paper. He asked his artificial teacher what these things were. His learning pod was still having technical difficulties, and they sent Charles home for the rest of the day. Unbeknownst to the bots, Charles, or anyone else for that matter, the learning pod had been corrupted, and it loaded several terabytes of information into Charles's optometrical implants. He was escorted home by a hospitality bot and sent all his lessons in his state-issued iPad. Charles saw another flash of weirdness in the hallway while being guided by the hospitality bot. He saw a man behind a window, and in front of the man was a wheel that he moved around in his hands, controlling a large vehicle of sorts. His vision stayed focused on the man's face, which changed colors as he drove all night. He took out his OIs and waited until he got home to put them on for his lessons. On his bed, he listened and watched the lesson recording. Back when there were wildernesses and topsoil, people would hunt and farm for their food. Mostly farming the land and keeping domestic animals kept them alive. This was all reliant on what we bots call the Goldilocks zone of Earth environment cycles. This planet is not due to be habitable for the life until 4,000 years from now, if then, when AI was mastered to save humanity from itself. We started by replacing your arts and literature and reducing it all to the Bible, a Judeo-Christian method of keeping the population controlled. May God be with you. The lesson went on like this, with lots of information about Middle Tennessee history dispersed with propaganda, although nobody saw it that way. In his modest little bedroom inside his family's modest apartment on the 236th floor, Charles saw another flash. There was a giant wheel. It stood as tall as a small building. It was lit up with every basic color of light. On the outside of the wheel were small porch swings where people sat riding the wheel high in the sky. The flash was gone. He was back in his bedroom. His parents called him for dinner. He told them of his optometrical implants bugs, how he had seen arches of a tacky yellow above a bunch of teenagers, a giant wheel, and a man who drove a small vehicle-like thing in the city lights. The parents seemed disturbed, for their grandparents, Charles' great-grandparents, were accustomed to these conventions. Charles' parents were only told stories and shown ancient movies about these things. They reassured Charles that things would return back to normal after they send in the OIs for a repair, along with a report to the Command Central. Their jobs would be on the line if it was found out that Charles had been shown these things and nothing was done about it. Charles had to lie and say his parents told him the images were distorted algorithmic generations that randomly found its way into his learning device. Charles didn't have any books to read the rest of that day, no outside to play in. Children were prohibited from watching any films, so he was stuck with just some music on his iPad. That 8-year-old only knew that the music that was available on his tablet. He really didn't understand the fact that all of humanity's music had been replaced and reduced to hymns and religious classical music, if human at all. And it was the only music that Charles would listen to. He sat in his dark room watching the lines and shapes of the screen walls dance to the music of Tchaikovsky and some composer named Black Spiritual. He really liked Black Spiritual, though he found him very similar and yet very different from traditional hymn, whoever that was. The next day would be less interesting, as his OIs would be replaced as well as the learning pod. Those would be sent to the quarry fields of junk to rust and be blown around by sandy winds. Charles would return back to the same old normal day. The normal learning plan was no flashes of ancient memory, no disturbances in his schedule. He missed daydreaming to music. He missed it deeply, and for the rest of his life that feeling stuck with him since.